You're listening to Art Affairs, episode 65. Today I'll be talking to Syd Bee. Alright, so my name is Michael Faith, and this is Art Affairs. Art Affairs is my attempt at shining a spotlight on the many wonderful people that make up this amazing art community, featuring conversations with artists, gallerists, curators, telling their stories. You can dig through previous episodes, complete with show notes, at artaffairs.podcast.com, but the best way to stay plugged in is to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're really enjoying the show and want to help support what I'm doing here in an even bigger way, check out the Art Affairs Patreon. Not only does it give you an opportunity to help keep the show going, but there are several community-oriented benefits as well, like getting early access to episodes and suggesting questions for upcoming guests. You can find all the information about that at patreon.com/artaffairs. You can also connect with the show on Instagram at Art Affairs Podcast. All right, so today's guest is artist Syd Bee. And Syd actually came up in my conversation with Casey Weldon a few episodes ago, who used to live in her hometown of Seattle. And as we talk about in this conversation, Syd spent most of her life in the Seattle area, even going to art school there. We also talk about the very surreal, dreamlike aesthetic of her work, her use of hand-built miniatures for reference, and a whole lot more. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Syd Bee. Syd, welcome to the show. It's really good to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me, Michael.
All right, so let's dive into your background a little bit. And I read that you growing up, that you moved around a lot. And I was going to ask you why, but I think I might know why, because I read that you were born on an Air Force base in California. So were your parents in the military? Like, were they service members?
Yeah, that's right. My mother was in the Air Force, and so I was born on an Air Force base that doesn't exist anymore. At some point, it was closed down due to some sort of secret hazardous waste dumping situation, a lot of jet fuel. But as a result of being a military kid, I got to live in a few different areas of the world, and that was very exciting, and I'm very grateful that I got to experience that. And then eventually, we adjusted to civilian life as I got a little bit older, which was a little different, kind of a culture shock in its own. But yeah, I was born in California, moved around the United States. I got to spend a few years growing up in an Air Force in Japan, which was really exciting. And then as an adult, decided to stay in the Pacific Northwest area. I moved here for school, for college, and I've loved it here. It's beautiful. There's trees, there's mountains, oceans, and a really lovely art scene that I love to be a part of. So it's sort of where I've called home for the last 12 years.
Okay, so as part of moving around, I guess, was that hard on you, just having to uproot in whatever connections that you'd made at the point that you had to move again?
Yeah. So one of the interesting things about being a military kid, or growing up as a child who moves around every year, every 2 years, is that you're always the new kid. So you go to a new city and a new school, and you don't know anybody. And this is obviously before cell phones. So if you had a friend from your previous life, there was really no way to stay in touch with them unless you wrote letters, because we didn't even really have email in the mid 90s, not until like AOL came around. But yeah, one of the ways that I learned to cope, and every kid does it different, but mine was that I got to reinvent myself every time. So I really enjoyed. Maybe I shouldn't say really enjoyed. I was able to find pleasure in, being the new kid and having something, different to offer to the kids that I was around. And sometimes that meant like, this time I was the really smart one, or like, oh, now this time I'm the goth one, or,
Right.
I got to play around with my identity a little bit because there was room to do that, freedom to do that. And, one of the other things that came around was that, as I got a little bit older and it became harder to lose friendships or to, peel away from some of the connections that you made as a kid, at that particular school, for example, if you moved, I clung on really hard. So as soon as the internet made it so that we could stay in touch, I held on to the one or two friends that I could make. It was definitely challenging, and it made it made me rely on my family much more in terms of social connection. But in hindsight, even though it was difficult at the time, but looking back on it now, I am so grateful that I got to move around as much as I did, because I think that really broadened my view as a youngster. And, it offered experiences that there are just really no other ways that I personally could have experienced some of those things. Living in another country, you just get to see and learn about things that you would only read about at home. And I'm as an adult now, I'm very grateful that I got to do that so young.
Sure. And so like the variety of cultural experiences you were exposed to, in addition to that, were you also exposed to the arts much as a kid? Is it something that was kind of fostered within your home?
Oh, absolutely. I think my mother, despite going into the military, I think at heart she's a very creative person, or wanted to be, and it wasn't really nourished as a youngster for her. So every creative impulse that I had growing up, every little artistic whim, they let me indulge it. If I wanted to paint my room bright, hot pink and draw on it with Sharpies, they let me do it. If I wanted to build a doll for no reason, my mom would let me go, source through her fabric bin. It wasn't perfect, but it was, when I think back on my childhood, the adults in my life really let me be as creative as I wanted to. And I can't say moving around the United States gave me much creative inspiration as a kid. I don't think I went to museums or anything like that. But like I said, living overseas, there was just so much that was new and exciting. And, going off because we lived on base, going off base to experience different parts of the city. I still think about that. Just a wealth of interesting visuals that, you don't have back home.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'd read that you made dolls and put on like puppet shows as a kid, and even like painted all over your teenage bedroom. Like, so that your parents just kind of let you do that sort of, express yourselves in those kind of creative ways. I think that's amazing that they were so supportive and encouraging of you for that.
Yeah, now that I'm an adult with bills to pay, it's hard to imagine just letting your kid draw on the walls. And, I remember I had, my bedroom door, I decided was going to be a page out of my sketchbook. So I just like painted on it, drew on it, like I said, Sharpied on it. That stuff's hard to cover up sometimes. But they let me do it. Hey man, parents are weird, but my parents let me be creative, and that was really, really great.
That's awesome. I also know that one of the kind of creative outlets that you had, as you were growing up, was creating your own comic books. And so, like, were you also into comic books as a kid? Like, is it something that you read a lot growing up?
I did like comic books. I think my formative exposure into illustration and storytelling was these books. You might remember them. They were called like the Great Illustrated Classics. I think they were from the I think they were from the 90s. They might have been from a little bit earlier, but they had basically what they did is take these, classical pieces of literature and then pare down the writing so that it was more comprehensive for a child or a young teenager, and then pair it with really, I thought they were fantastic, black and white illustrations. And so that was how I got to learn about stories like Jane Eyre or Dracula, or my favorite, The Count of Monte Cristo. And it was those drawings that really got me started, gave me an interest into storytelling with visual medium. I think that was one of the first ones.
Very cool. And so is that sort of that type of visual illustrative storytelling, whether it's comic books or illustrated books, is that something that you're still really kind of into today?
Yes. Although it's been really hard. I think let me see if a way to word this. I don't think I'm unique in this, but the last couple of years have sort of turned everything upside down. And so like a lot of things that I used to love up to the shutdown of everything sort of went flip-floppy. So it's hard for me to say yes, because I haven't read a comic book in a couple of years. But prior to that, I was loved comic books. I think that one comes to mind. When I was a kid, there was a book called The Mysteries of Harris Burdick by Chris Van Allsburg, and he's the same person who did The Polar Express and many other beloved children's books. But this book, The Mysteries, it was a very slim book, and the premise of it was that there's this mysterious author named Harris Burdick, and he submitted this, basically a tome to a publisher, and all but maybe 10 drawings, 10 snippets of this book are lost. It's gone. It's gone, and it's a mystery. But there are these select drawings and like tiny little snippets that remained, and they're gorgeous. These illustrations are gorgeous. I remember looking at them, and you want to crawl into. They look like they're charcoal and pencil, and they're so atmospheric, and they're a little bit spooky, and I just wanted to climb inside all of them. And I think that was probably more so than comic books. I think that book has been one of the most important examples in my life of the way that one single image can be the launching pad for an entire story. So, when I was in college, I did try to make my own comics. I did a few little auto-bio comics, went to the store today and I tripped. And I think that was really fun. But I don't think sequential storytelling is my strong suit. I think it requires a very specific way of thinking, and the people who are good at it. I have lots of friends who make graphic novels, and they're writing for it or they're drawing for it. And they're so skilled at it. And I tried, it just doesn't, my brain doesn't work that way. But when I go back to this book, the Mysteries of Harris Burdick, that sort of gave me the confidence to allow one image be the story, or, be the invitation, the portal by which you enter into the story. And that felt right for me.
No, that's really cool that you were able to make that kind of discovery. At what point was that in just your development? When did you discover that and kind of make that recognition?
Well, so the book itself, like I said, I was pretty young. I was like in 4th grade. And then I forgot the name, because you're a kid. Why would you remember something, a detail like that? And so going through college, comics were so cool, and I wanted to be one of the cool kids. So I wanted to do comics because I wanted to be cool. And I just wasn't very good at it. But I could paint an image, one I could do one. And then the opportunity presented itself. Well, maybe you could do covers for comic books. You don't have to do all the artwork inside. You just do the one on top. And that was cool. And I got to do one. I got to do some examples for others, but they didn't come to fruition. And that's also not my strong suit either, because those deadlines are so fast. And at the time I was a traditional painter. I didn't have like the digital skills to keep up with people who were turning out excellent pieces of work in 2 days. And I just can't compete with that. So it was kind of like trial and error of trying to find a way to make it feel right for me that, one image could be enough. And honestly, I think after it was just time and experimentation to see what felt right. And in a way it does still feel right, but there's also so much more room to grow even now.
Awesome. So like growing up, just thinking back to your development, you were doing all these creative things, but did you think of it as a possible career? Like, is it something you thought you would want to do professionally even back then? Or is it something that you recognized later?
When I was growing up, there weren't many examples around me of adults who were professional artists. So I didn't know that was something you can do. I was surrounded by people who had, pretty serious jobs. Not that art isn't serious, but, like I said, my mother was in the military, and, all of my friends, their parents were officers or, doctors or something like that. And so I perceived adulthood being something where you go to work and now you're a lawyer, or I thought for the longest time I was going to be a veterinarian, until I learned that sometimes you have to, help a sick animal by putting it down. So I couldn't possibly do that. Not that it's not important. I just couldn't do it. So no, I never conceived of a life that had art as a profession. I didn't know what that could look like. And I think that's why I struggled so much in college, trying to figure out how to make it a profession, I love comic books. Is it comic book covers? I love doing paintings, but do you just sell one painting over and over again? Is that how you do it? And I think one of the ways that the college experience for me could have been improved would have been having, I don't even know what it would be, like a course that basically says there are so many ways to make art a profession, but let's get into the brass tacks, the business side of it, so that you don't fall into the trap of thinking, if I just make a painting and sell it, now I'm a pro artist, and that's all that there is to it. Like, there's everybody that I know is making lots of different stuff. They've got their hands in all kinds of pots to make it work. So no, I didn't know. And as a teenager, young adult, it became clear that I'm only really good at a couple of things. And art was one of the things that I, at the time, had a natural aptitude for. And like I said, the adults in my life were very encouraging of it. So it seemed like, if I could find a way to make it work, then I'll do that. But I didn't really have a plan B. So
Right.
Just kind of see what happens, go to school and see what happens.
Yeah, and so speaking of school, you went to Cornish College there in Seattle, and so I guess what led you to that school? What was it about that attracted you?
Proximity. I'm the first person in my family to go to college that I'm aware of, and like I said, my parents were pretty supportive, but I think a lot of other people in my family weren't so sure that was a wise investment. And it was the closest art school near me where I was living at the time that felt right, and that was also in a budget that I could, my little brain could understand. So, and there were a lot of things that had to line up just right for that to have worked out for me the way that it did, because even though I came from a family from the military. We didn't have any college savings. There was really nothing. And so I think that one of the conversations I had when I was seriously considering going to art school was, from one of the supportive people in my life, they were like, well, we'll encourage you. We support this, but you have to figure out how to make it work. So yeah, there were just, and I had the help of many people to make that happen. But it was just, it seemed to me that so many of the artists that I had been following at that time, when I would read their bios, they graduated from some prestigious art school, or they got their BFA here or their MFA there. And so when I was 18, 19, it seemed like, well, I really loved their work, and and they all went to school, so it seemed like I should probably do that too. So I did.
Right on. And what was your focus there? Was it painting? Was it illustration? What were your...
They, like most art schools, they make you bounce around from area to area to see what you're interested in. So even though I went in thinking that I was going to only be a painter forever, they make you do sculpture, which I loved, and illustration work, printmaking, video work, all kinds of other things. So yeah, my by the end of it, my focus stayed primarily with painting, but I did branch out and fabricate things, build things, which I really loved.
Very cool. And so you must have been an amazing student, because you graduated magna cum laude in like 2013. So were you just a rock star student? That was, I mean, that's impressive, right? That level of commitment.
I don't think I was a rock star student. I just, it felt right to make art to me. It's kind of a stumper, because part of me wants to get a little bit personal, and then part of me is like, maybe I will. So growing up as I'll say now, I'm a recovering people pleaser, but as a young person, I definitely tried to get all the gold stars and get all the A's that I could, and so I think I was still young enough that in college it was probably about the same. But it's hard, because at art school, while there are some topics that are challenging, art history for one, you have to memorize a bunch of stuff, and I have long since forgotten most of it. That's why I write everything down now. I'm so grateful that I was in a position that I was to be at where I was, because, now that I have some time and perspective, and I see how all the things that had to fall into place for someone like me to be able to go to a place like that, it's really remarkable, and I'm glad that I didn't. I'm proud of myself that even then I didn't waste that opportunity, but to learn as much as I could. So I don't think I was like an exceptional student, but it took a lot for me to be there. There was a lot that had to happen for me to be there, so I didn't want to waste it as much as I could avoid.
Yeah. And so just looking back, just in general, how do you feel about your time in school? Do you feel like it was a rewarding experience? Did it help you kind of grow in the ways that you needed?
Looking back at my time in school, it's sort of a mixed bag, because on one hand, I'm incredibly grateful that everything worked out the way that it did, and that I had the support from the people that I did, and that the friendships and connections that I made while I was there helped support me to get through it as well. And in many ways, my life now wouldn't look the way that it does if I hadn't gone to school. On the other hand, I've got younger siblings who are like, I want to go to art school too, and it doesn't look like that's going to be a possibility for them, because their circumstances aren't as fortuitous as mine had been at the time anyway. So it also that, seeing how that's not a possibility for some people also makes me realize that it's not a necessity. Like, I don't think you have to go. I'm grateful that I did, and I was able to get something out of it, but I don't think it's a requirement. to be a professional. I don't think you have to have a successful art career. In order to have a successful art career, you have to go to school. I don't believe that at all.
Very cool. After graduating college, obviously, you went to school in Seattle, and that was kind of the reason why you stayed in Seattle. But then you ended up staying there and still live there today. So had that just become home to you? Or did you kind of fall in love with that area and wanted it to be, your forever home?
Yeah. After college, it became pretty clear to me that the Pacific Northwest in general has so much to offer. And at the time, there were so many amazing artists all living in the same hub here, and it seemed like every first Thursday when there was an art walk, or and all the galleries opened up, it seemed like it was amazing to have all these artists come out at the time. So this is about almost 9-10 years ago now. It was just very exciting, and I wanted to stay in the area to be a part of it. Also, we have some amazing galleries up here, and we got Rock LaRue up here. I love Rock LaRue. I've loved Rock LaRue since I was a teenager, looking at Juxtapose and High Fructose. So, to think of that's right here in our backyard, I wanted to be near that. Because Kirsten's showing, she's been showing artists that I've loved and have looked up to for, all this time. So it's definitely a privilege to be near it. And then, like I said, I mentioned the landscape before, but the Pacific Northwest, it suits my personality great. Except for the heat waves we've been having the last couple of years. But other than that, it's exactly the kind of mood that I love to live in.
That's awesome. And so you mentioned Rock LaRue and just the art community there. Is that been something that's been a strong, attractor to you to that area? Do you feel like you're part of a larger community in the Seattle area?
Yeah, it definitely kept me here when there were opportunities to move away, and many of my closest friends I was able to meet through the arts community here, and so. Yeah, I do feel deeply connected to it.
Excellent. And so you didn't waste any time getting your work into galleries. And I think you even started putting work in group exhibitions even before you graduated in 2012. So how did you, first start getting your work into galleries and making some of those connections in the art world?
Yeah. Well, like I said, I modeled a lot of my early career after the other artists that I looked up to. So if I saw that somebody went to art school, I said, I should probably go to art school. If I saw that somebody had been in a bunch of group shows, I was like, okay, I should probably get into some group shows. So I don't have memories of it, but I think that I don't remember exactly how it started, but I think I probably just reached out when I was in college, just reached out to a couple of galleries that seemed to show work that I thought I was performing at the time. And so maybe some said yes, most of them said no. And then, you do one, and then you do another, and then, another gallery might ask you to do it. So I had a really hard time saying no. Like I said, recovering people pleaser. So after graduating, I just said yes to every opportunity that I could. And that did lead to some burnout, for sure. I learned to be a little bit more careful with what I agree to do. But yeah, I was just ravenous to get my work out there, and it felt good to be wanted and to be asked to be in a group. So felt validating too, like, okay, good, I just spent all this money to go to this school and made all these sacrifices and made other people make sacrifices for me to go to the school. So I can't say no to a show. So I did a lot right after college.
Right. And so that early work in, 2012, 2013, was it very similar in style to what you're making today? Or like, had you already developed your, creative voice by then, or were you still trying to figure that out?
No, I was still figuring it out. Oh, for sure. I think that if I could do things differently, I would advise myself to take more time right out of college and just continue personal exploration and experimentation, rather than saying yes to every show that I could, because what that ended up doing I didn't realize it at the time, but the point of making a piece for a show is to sell. So I would guide my work to be the kind of work that I thought would sell, versus maybe some of the more experimental stuff that, maybe it won't sell. Maybe it's just for fun. But I didn't have a lot of time to just experiment and have fun because I was back-to-back deadlines with shows. And so it's kind of like, I think I've heard it on your podcast talked about before, but it's definitely a discussion that, I hear amongst artists and creative people all the time, which is, the rise of social media, and how if you want to have visibility, the Mr. Algorithm to give you the visibility that you're looking for, the content needs to be the kind that the algorithm deems is worthy for it, right? So then you've got a bunch of artists who are, making work to be seen, but in order to have it seen, it has to be a specific kind of work or a type of work that gets rewarded with views. And in a similar way, that's how I found doing all that gallery work to be. I love doing gallery work, don't get me wrong, but I think that, 10 years ago when I was doing it, I was saying yes to so much that I wasn't giving myself breathing room to play. So.
Yeah. And I think there's two aspects to that each have separately come up on the show before. One is just guarding yourself against burnout and not overextending yourself. At the last handful of shows, it seems to have come up quite a bit with some of the folks that I've talked to. And then the other side of it is, how do you protect against your creative vision getting impacted by the monetization of it, and how do you protect against social media and the algorithm influencing the direction that you go in? Maybe you wouldn't go in a different. So I guess what advice would you have to people that may be struggling with saying no and potentially overextending themselves so that they don't get into that position?
The advice I might have for somebody else who is in a position where they have to juggle making money off of their work, but making work that is also true to themselves. Or maybe I should repeat this. The advice that I would give to somebody who needs to make money, but also wants to make work that they're satisfied with, work for themselves, would be to give yourself the breathing room. If you're in a position like me, give yourself the breathing room of other income so that the artwork doesn't have to sell to be a success for you. One of the biggest realizations I had, and this was only in the last couple of years really, because I always struggled. Why can't I make all of my income from these art shows? Am I doing something wrong? If a painting didn't sell, I felt like a failure. If a show didn't sell out, I felt like a failure. I mean, it was really devastating. And I had to have a very serious conversation with myself, because I've had a job this, almost my entire adult life. And I had to be honest with myself about why I wasn't diving into, painting full time. Why did I feel like a failure for not doing that too? And I think the answer that I've come to that feels right is that I like removing the very necessary income component away from it as much as possible, so that if something doesn't sell, it's not devastating to me. It doesn't mean that I'm, going to go hungry or anything like that. It means my bills will still be paid. So, and I think that actually benefits the art even more, because then you're making work that you're excited about, and you can pour the kind of time that you need to into it, and the audience who likes what you're doing, they will find you eventually. so even if it's not Instagram, approved, Instagram worthy, it's work that makes you satisfied. And that would be my advice. I mean, I think I had somebody in my life when I was in college try to give me that advice, but it's not very sexy advice, so I don't think I really listened to it. And I was very good at not listening to people when they told me stuff. And being, I was very good at saying, no, I knew what I know better. I definitely had somebody say, get a job, find a way to get a job so that, you're not going to destroy yourself trying to make work that, may or may not sell.
And so when did you start listening to that? Like, when did you make the decision of, oh, that actually makes a lot of sense. I should have a day job so that I can relieve myself of that financial burden of, that's potentially changing my craft.
Well, I've always had a job in tandem with art making. I whether it's a part-time job or a full-time job. Right now I have a full-time job. It was less of knowing that that's what needs to happen and more with making peace with the fact that that's the way it has been. And that's the way that it has to be, at least for now. And that's okay. Like I said, I would beat myself up if I wasn't doing art full time. I've got peers who do art full time, and I'd look at their lives and I would compare it against mine and think that I was a failure because I needed a job, because, my work wasn't selling, for the rates that theirs were selling, or it wasn't selling at all sometimes. And I mean, there's the other hidden component that I think that gets missed a lot. And it's something that I definitely didn't hear discussed in college, which was, and I think I think this does a disservice to young artists, which is there's always an unseen source of support, always. Whether that source of support is the day job, whether the source of support is a spouse who has the job, or parents who have that are contributing financially, there's always something. I haven't seen any examples of any successful artists I know personally who are doing art full time and not one person has helped them. You know what I mean? Or even if that person is themselves with a job. There are teachers as well as artists. They are, they're working a corporate gig, but they're also artists, or, you know what I'm saying? So I think giving yourself that support, finding that support, I should say, that is critical to living a life that is healthy and art focused as well.
And so, a lot of the people that I've talked to who do value that kind of day job, personal dynamic, will often get jobs that are adjacent to art career. Is something that is still art related. Maybe it's commercial illustration, or in the case of like Jeremy Hush, she does woodworking on like beautiful woodworking for residential homes. It's still kind of art related. What type of work have you historically kind of gone into or been attracted to?
Yeah, the same. I think that was a piece of advice that Jim Henson had back when he would give lectures or do like talkings to younger artists. Basically, like if you're going to be a creative person, get a job that somehow facilitates in some way, whatever it is, that helps to benefit that creative part. Because you don't want to spend 8 hours a day doing something that's totally different, unless that's helping you somehow. But yeah, no, I worked at a print shop, a fine art scanning and reproduction studio out of Bellevue, called Bellevue Fine Art Reproduction. I started working there right out of college, and that was a really great part-time job for someone in a position like me. Right out of school, you get to meet a bunch of local artists who are coming in to get their work scanned and made prints of. And then also it was really good for me because then I could get my stuff scanned and reproduced. And then you learn a lot about business from that, because you're getting so many people who are trying to make art careers work for them. So you have those kinds of discussions, and I worked there for a long time, and then that really helped to fuel a lot of my creative endeavors outside of that. And now I work for a games and collectibles company where I get to paint statues.
Nice.
And help make new games. I've been very lucky to be able to have jobs that are both creative, but also teach a little bit about some component of what I like to do. Whether it's learning more about the business side of art, or whether it's learning a new painting technique. Like I said, I paint statues. That's new. That was new to me. If possible, but that is also a privilege to be able to do that. And
so you said that this current role, I think you said you're working full time. how are you able to balance the day job work and still have that creative spark when you're working on your personal stuff?
Very hard. So it is a challenge to balance full-time work with, nighttime and weekend art making. And it is not always successful, unfortunately for me. I guess I'm just either I'm not very good at managing my time sometimes, or it's either that or what else? What else could be the reason? No, I think, well, let's see, how personal do I want to get? When the pandemic hit, and I think everybody's tired of talking about it, but my priorities took a pretty big shift. It became clear to me that I needed to focus on money making so that I could build up a safety net for myself. And so when I got the full-time job that I have, my priority was, it was no longer art making. It was work, pour everything I have into this new job that I have, make what I need to make, save what I need to save. And, it also lined up with a bunch of galleries postponing or halting their shows. I mean, there just wasn't anything going on. It felt like just all the noise that you live with just suddenly stopped. And so I spent the last couple of years just really focusing on that, and it made sense for me to do that. So, paused from art making is kind of a way to say that, but it was the right thing to do for me. And now, things have opened back up. Shows are back on. I just had a solo show that I sent down to Utra Gallery down in Australia, which was wonderful. They're lovely. It is a challenge to carve out the time when you would rather be sleeping or living.
Right.
It has been challenging, but it's also made it so that, I need to be more selective with the things that I agree to do. So when I do participate in something, it's because I really want it. And actually, I shouldn't even say that, because there are things that I back out of that I really want to do, but it just doesn't work out. Yeah, you get to be more selective, I think.
Yeah, and so you at the start of the pandemic, and I think I had read that you had been laid off at some point.
Yeah, when the pandemic hit, it was like everything shut down, and people in my position were no exception.
And so, you can definitely see how that would spur you to be like, okay, I got to focus on money, because I suddenly don't have a job, and then the world is falling apart around me. So that makes a lot of sense why you would kind of refocus your energy. At what point did you broaden that back out again and start? I mean, because you had the gallery show at Utra, like you said, in I think it was March. So clearly, at least at some point between April 2020 and that show that you had, you started focusing on art again. And so when did you feel comfortable doing that? How long did it take you to get back on your feet?
Yeah, so you mentioned Utra, and Martin down at that gallery. He has been such a wonderful person to partner up with on various group shows, and that particular solo show had been canceled because it was slated to go up. Yes, it was scheduled to go up, and then the pandemic hit, and so everything shut down, and basically the consensus was, we don't know when. We don't know if things will open back up. We don't know if the shows will resume. If we don't know anything. We'll just play everything by ear. And so that was all the permission I needed to just stop making. Right? Right. We don't know shit. Then I'm just gonna focus on my day job. So, but Martin at Utra and I, we stayed in touch, and every 6 months we check back in and be like, so how's it going with you? Oh, it's still not great. Cool. Not great here either, and I've been wanting to work with him for so long on a big project. And like I said, he's really wonderful to partner with. So then at some point when things were starting to look promising, and not as apocalyptic. The conversation became, well, would you still like to do this? And yes, we would still like to do this. Okay, great. Maybe let's set a tentative date out for this time. And okay, and then check back in. And it's like, actually, no, let's not do that. Let's set it out further. So at some point, I think, to answer your question, it was less about feeling comfortable to do it and more like, okay, I'm getting this support and the green light from, this person who has been working with me for the last couple of years, that we can move ahead. I just got to make something and get out there. I didn't feel comfortable. I didn't feel creative. I didn't feel like I had the time that I needed, but, or the ideas that I wanted. A lot of, for that particular show, I had started it in 2019. Some of those pieces I had begun working on 3 years ago. And by the time it was apparent that I needed to, finish up the show, get it going, I just sanded them off and started over because I was, different person, different place. Some of those ideas just didn't feel right anymore. So it wasn't about feeling comfortable. It was about just doing it, I guess.
And so I'm curious how this whole experience has affected like the pace at which you work, because prior to now you were doing a solo show every couple of years, and that seemed to be like a consistent pace for you. Do you feel like that's going to change now that you're kind of relearning or kind of seeing how your art practice relates to your day job, and that's sort of changed a little bit? Do you think you'll slow down a bit more? Or do you want to? I mean, is that a goal that you have?
I don't want to slow down. I think I have to. I think that it's good to slow down, and a lot of the ideas that I have now they feel more complicated for my style, for the things that other ideas that I've been exploring. Compared to the other ideas that I had been exploring previously. The things that come to mind now for me are such that they require more time, they require more care, and I'm okay with that because I like some of the concepts that I'm exploring now, and the projects that I have in my mind that I want to bring to life later. I feel satisfied in the decision to give them the time that they need. And if that means slowing down or only doing a couple of shows a year or one show a year or no shows a year because I need to spend all that time working, I think I'm at a place now where I can make those decisions and not feel like a failure for it.
Excellent. I mean, I'm sure that's a lot of introspection. That's a lot, because that's a personal thing where you're like, okay, I'm going to focus on doing what's right for me and not necessarily or meeting some expectation that I think other people have of me, Yeah,
but some people come to that realization much sooner than others, and clearly it took me a while. Like I said, it's been a journey to, suss out what feels right for me, even if it doesn't look like what I thought it would look like or what other people maybe want for you. It's hard because when you're a young artist, you've got, I did it. You look at what other successful artists are doing. By successful, maybe successful by your definition, right? Whatever that is. And you may use that as the marker for how you ought to live your life. But it's so easy to forget that that's not you, and your circumstances are unique to you. And so you have to, it just took me a little bit longer to realize all that, I think.
That's great that you have, though. And so let's dive into the work itself. And I know that your work often has this very kind of dreamlike aesthetic to it, all the way from the colors that you use to the surreal imagery. Is your work inspired by your own dreams? Is that a source of inspiration for you? I would say that dreams, musings, or ideas that sort of just come to you when you're in a relaxed state and
your mind is wandering, or you're looking out a window or something. Yeah, I do a lot of reading and writing of different, observations from what I read. I don't write anything. I don't write novels or stories per se, but if I'm reading poetry and I'm curious by a particular passage or a word that I don't understand the meaning of, I'll write that down. And sometimes that leads to, other ideas or I love being curious, and I love learning about something and learning about what inspired that thing and who referenced that. And actually there's a backstory to it, and there's history there, or there's another word that's related to that. I love that. And oftentimes when I'm just on my little, following wherever the thread of curiosity takes me, that's when an idea will come up. And sometimes it's when I'm laying down trying to go to bed, and then I'll have an idea and I'll grab my phone and voice record some nonsense like cat on a boat and he's crying, and other times, if the ideas are just not coming, man, it's like I'm drawing blanks, I'm watching movies, I'm reading books, reading poetry, and I'm just not getting any ideas, although it's very hard not to get any ideas when you're having that much creative input. But I will also force ideas out by writing little one-word verbs or nouns on pieces of paper, jumbling them up in a tin, pulling them out, writing them down. It's like, the Dadaists and poets, in history, they did all kinds of goofy conjurings like that, clippings from newspapers to make new poems. I'll force ideas out that way sometimes too. Some of them are not great, but it's more about the process of getting the gears spinning. And there were a couple of years there right before the pandemic hit where I was struggling with some health problems that severely impacted my cognition, and I had some really bad brain frog. See, I had some really bad brain fog for a couple of years there, and it was really hard to concentrate. It was very, very difficult to be creative. And so it was helpful to have those little tricks of forcing ideas out just by way of playing with words and, seeing what pops to mind, when you hear a new word, or you put it next to that word, or you think about the guy who invented that word, So where the inspiration comes, it just comes from exploration and curiosity of daydreams, I guess, and a lot of reading.
Very cool. And so do you have any techniques that you use for remembering some of these things? You said you used your phone and you'll just state a kind of a prompt in your phone. But even then, you have to remember what you were even thinking about at the time once you re-listen to it the next day or whatever. Yeah. So how do you go about retaining some of those ideas, and do you have techniques for that?
Yeah, recording things down on your phone is not super reliable because I have found that I'll do it while I'm really sleepy, and so I don't even remember doing it. And also it's just garbage. No, I write things down. I have to write them down. I have, as I'm getting a little bit older, I'm having more memory related sort of issues. And so I write it as much as I can. I write it down. I've got notes in my phone. I know this is a podcast, but I'll show you. I've got books like this where it's just, it's not very good, is it? Just passages on passages, or, interesting phrases or words or ideas. And then I'll lead it to another idea. It's more about the process of writing everything down and getting the ideas out. Then later, when I'm in a position where I need to find something to make, I'm okay, I agreed to do a show. What are we going to do? I'll go back to the journals and be okay, well, what was I interested in 6 months ago? What kinds of curious phrases popped up while I was reading that poem? Oh, that's interesting. Ooh, that makes me think of this, that, or the other. And so it's a lot of language-based note keeping, things like that. I don't really keep, I I don't use my sketchbook the way a lot of other artists do. I tend to write in my sketchbook more, rather than draw out thumbnails or, if I have an image in my head, instead of drawing out the image, I'll write what the image looks like. I find that sketching can be so difficult for me. It always has been. I don't get a lot of pleasure from it. And it feels so concrete, like, okay, that's the image. A person standing on the bridge, that's the image. But if I write the words, a person standing on the bridge, I don't know what the person looks like. I don't know what the bridge looks like. Is it a real bridge? Is it is it just a concept of a bridge? Like, it feels more freeing if it's written word versus a drawing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
No, that's fascinating. And so, we talked earlier about the recognition that you had where you're not necessarily, good at sequential images, and you like to capture a larger story with one image. And that was the kind of realization you made early on. But do you, in the service of creating a piece, write the larger backstory that image is participating in? Does that help you in that your kind of creative process?
It does. And I do. But those are like private for me only.
Right.
So, I mean, I suppose if, someone were to come visit me and see a new painting I was working on, that could be part of that discussion. But, it does help me because, to have loosely a story written out in some way, because, then when I'm continuing to work on the piece, if there's a component in there that might seem out of place for someone who's just seeing it for the first time, it makes sense to me because it's part of that story. Yeah.
Awesome. And so, like, are the stories that you're telling, are these personal experiences? Are you telling larger kind of global truths? Like, what are the stories that you're telling if your art is more kind of a narrative based?
Yeah, I think when I was younger, it definitely was more self-focused. I think that has a lot to do with youth in general and who I was at the time, for sure. But as I've gotten older, there are concepts that I'm interested in exploring, and they're bigger than me. Sometimes, oftentimes, they're bigger than me, and I use visual language that I know to try to communicate what it is that I'm trying to, ask. It's usually a question rather than a story. But there are a few pieces that I've been working on, and several more that are underway right now that are a little bit different than I have been used to previously. Because there's so much that I'm curious. There's so many questions that I want to ask that I don't know how to. I don't know. There are certain stories that I don't know how to tell, but there's a lot of questions that I want to ask, and so there are a lot of concepts that I'm trying to put in visual form that they're less about me personally. I would say some of these, and more about. Maybe more general concepts or universal concepts that a lot of people share. Yeah. But certainly there were pieces that were just straight up self-portraits and like, I'm having a rough time and here's a painting about it.
Right. So for that, when you were working on a larger body of work, whether it's for a show or just kind of a collection of pieces, do you like those to have those stories or the questions that you're asking through your pieces? Do you like to there be a connecting kind of thread throughout, the entirety of them?
I think that's very fun, to have that thread through all the paintings or throughout the work. I love that you could look at a series and see a connection through all of them. I try not to be explicit with it, if that is the intention. Like this last solo show that I had with Outre, all of those paintings that were part of that show in Outre, to me, they were in the same universe. Like they were all characters or environments that were part of the same, sort of world, but they were individual stories of themselves. And personally, I love looking at other artists' work and seeing sort of this thread line through their pieces, and seeing, even if I don't know them personally, seeing sort of like this development of narrative, perhaps. But then I really love when you know about the artist, or maybe you're friends with them, or you just happen to know a lot about them if you know they're from history, and you can line up paintings with specific periods of their life and know that, like, oh, well, they were experiencing this, or there was a war happening during this time, and this is the work they were making during that time, or, you know, I think that's very interesting too. I don't know if that answers your question, but
yeah, no, I think it does, and you know, I guess. Well, I think that speaks a lot to me, just because I've always felt that knowing the larger story of the situation around the art gives you a more rewarding experience consuming the art, you know, just knowing the person's backstory or knowing the circumstances that were going on around them. So that definitely makes a lot of sense to me. I guess, how much intention do you approach that sort of thing with, when it is for, like, if you are aiming to have a through line throughout a body of work, do you figure out what that is before you start working on the show, or do you start just working and then that sort of organically develops over time?
I like to have those things figured out ahead of time, because I have experienced it. I know myself well enough to know now that if I try to problem solve as I go, it's not going to be as good than if I did a lot of the problem solving ahead of time. I'm not a very good improviser, so it helps to at least have a guideline by which all the work gets made. Obviously, there are happy accidents that you uncover along the way, and moments of serendipity that you just can't account for that result in a better outcome. But yeah, I try to have things planned out ahead of time, or written out, or, you know, the skeleton formed when it comes to the content, or the message, or the question, or the story. And then the painting is the muscles that get built around it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And so once you have like a solid idea, once you start working on the individual pieces, and have kind of a solid idea for a piece, how do you go about developing your composition? Is it something that, I mean, you said you're not a fan of sketches, you know, so do you do sketches, or do you just jump right into painting? Do you do digital composition? What's your method for developing compositions?
Yeah, I'll do digital compositions. I'll draw things out on the iPad or in Photoshop. I'll, you know, put things together. And it's so much easier for me to very quickly see, you know, the technical aspects of how a painting is going to work out. Because then if you mess it up, you just start over immediately. But it's, I don't know, it's easier for me to do that, to do it that way, to sort of like Frankenstein these components together, than it is to just like sketch it out from imagination. I just don't, it's never been pleasurable. It's very hard. And I do have to plan it out. Absolutely. I have made the mistake of thinking I was a better painter than I am, and that I could just put it all out on canvas and figure it out as I go. And that always leads to trouble for me.
Right.
For me.
I know that you also build like miniature sets. Like that was, I saw that was part of your process, at least for some of the pieces that you do, which I found was fascinating. And I guess, how did that become part of your process? And is that something that's always been a part of what you've done creatively?
It was certainly not something I always did. I love building little things. I love sculpture. It's satisfying to make something with your hands that isn't flat, you know? No, it came about out of necessity. There were ideas that I saw in my head that when I tried to draw them out or tried to mock them up on the computer, it just wasn't right. It wasn't doing it. And so, you know, the only way to capture, you know, get a good reference of what I was trying to make, I just needed to build it, because that's the only way I can control the way that the light is falling on it, the way that this particular, you know, shape looks in this form. Like, I just had to. And it's very satisfying to do. Now, the main problem that I have is, as a recovering perfectionist, I have had to learn how to let go when it comes to these little dioramas or these little sets, because they are a tool to get me to the idea. They are not the final product. They are not meant to last. And so I have learned, I'm getting much better about it now, to make these little dioramas or these little sets out of, I'll make them out of trash or garbage. Trash is good. I'll make them out of recycled materials or trash or little bits and bobs that I have around the house, because, I don't need them to be perfect items. They're probably just going to get recycled when I'm done anyway. But a few of the paintings that I'm working on right now, which, whenever this comes out, they'll probably be out in public, but that was the only way to get the reference, was to build these little cities, or to build a monolith coming out of a lake and people standing around it. I don't know how to imagine that. Like, I can see it in my head, but I don't know how to draw or paint that. So I had to build a tiny little set to do it, even if it's out of cardboard. And I think that has made me. It has made my process more interesting to me. And so I don't know if it's going to make the work better, but it is making me love the process more, actually.
And how detailed do you usually get with these?
It depends. For one of these paintings where there's like a thing glowing out of a lake, I really just needed certain forms, and so I just needed a square for the main shape, and then I needed tiny people, so I got some little people, 3D printed, because all I need are the forms of like how does it look when they're in this angle and the light is hitting them a certain way. It's so specific that you could find those images online, but it would take a long time. You could take your own photos, certainly. But I needed people who were very small. So that means I'd have to be very far away from them, or I could just get them 3D printed. It's fine. And then I have total control over this little set. But that's all I need, are just the form structures and to get the angles right and to get the lighting right. There's another painting I'm working on with, a lot of little buildings. And listen, man, I can't imagine all that. I just need to see it. So I, got these little buildings and put them together, and if the light is hitting a certain way, then it's all uniform. It all makes sense. Whereas if I was trying to come up with that out of my own head, I just don't have that skill. So, it just depends. It would be very fun if I get to a point where I'm making these little dioramas to serve as references, and if they were nice enough and solid enough to be pieces in and of themselves, that would be cool too. But for right now, it is just cardboard and plastic.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, have you ever had a desire to explore sculpture? Because we talked earlier, when you were a kid, you were making dolls, and you were very, appreciated kind of the physical forms, as well as have you thought about having sculpture be a bigger part of what you do as the final product?
Yeah, absolutely. Until recently, I was living exclusively in tiny apartments, so that made sculpture very difficult. It's absolutely something I'd love to do. I think it's great. Objects are special and magical, and I love making them just as much as I love making paintings. It really comes down to space. You have to have a designated space to make all the sculptures and to have all the materials to make sculptures. But a painting, man, you just need a desk,
Right.
I'm sure someone's going to argue with me and be like, you can make sculpture anywhere. But in my experience, I need space. So.
Right on. And so, we talked earlier about kind of the surreal, dreamlike nature of your work. And I think your color palette, or your choice of colors, really plays a lot into that as well. Kind of very surreal and, interestingly, both bright and dark at the same time, which I find fascinating. So I guess how do you approach color when you're working on a piece, and is that something that you put a lot of thought and intention towards up front, or is it more feeling based and it's sort of organic as you're working out the piece itself?
Yeah. Previously, I think that earlier on in my career, it was more intuitive. I was just reaching for colors that felt right at the time. Eventually, what happened though is that I kind of got a little surprised by reactions when I would choose colors outside of that range, right? I did a lot of pinks, a lot of blues, and then when I would do something different, I felt like I wasn't living up to the expectation of being a pink and blue artist. I'm like, well, that's just because they made me happy at the time, and I want to do something different now. And yeah, it was all very intuitive. And sometimes you make bad decisions intuitively. So I learned that I needed to shape it up a bit. Actually, so working at my day job where I paint statues, and it's client-based work, so it's for somebody else. It has to hit someone else's expectations and the markers that they set. It became pretty clear that I needed to talk about color theory a little bit better and to communicate it to a team. So I couldn't just rely on because it felt right. That wasn't good enough. And so what that has informed my personal practice is, I have learned that my work benefits from more work ahead of time, planning out my colors. I do a lot of prelims now. I did not do that stuff before. I test out my colors. I try to make sure I know how my pigments work with each other. What's the fastest way to get to an end result using the fewest amount of colors as possible. I didn't do that before. I think my relationship with colors has gotten better, actually, because of my day job. And I'd like to think it's making my work better too, but I think really it's just making my relationship to my work better. Because I can say like, I did these experimentations and I can tell you why these colors work versus it just felt right,
So it's given you the means to articulate something that was mostly just feeling based. Now you can actually speak about, well, this is why I did it that way.
That's right. I mean, technically, when you do go to any type of when you get any kind of schooling, you do learn color theory and like the mechanics of painting and all that technical aspect related stuff. But when it came to my personal work, it was always I would just reach for what felt right and optically for me, right? So, imagine you're going to like a hardware store and you go to the paint chip aisle and you're looking at all of those colors. There are certain areas that you are probably more drawn towards than others. And so I would just keep going and making work that made me feel a certain way, probably, made me feel good or made me feel excited. And now it's a little bit less of making me feel excited and more like, okay, well, what's the most effective way to make this painting look good? What's the most effective way to make that particular component in the painting pop, rather than how do I feel? But ultimately it makes me feel better for it because now I have more research to back up, my idea. And that makes me feel more secure going in.
Yeah, I see color swatches behind you there on the wall. Is that part of your process where you're trying to, I guess, land on a certain palette for a piece, or how does that participate in your current process now that you've learned a bit more, or at least, adjusted your relationship to color?
Yeah, I think it's made me a stronger painter, actually. Like I said, I didn't really do color studies prior. I thought that they weren't sexy. I just want to get started on painting. Once I figured out the idea, let's go. I know what colors I like, do it. But now I want to have a deeper relationship with the tools that I use. I just want to have a better relationship with what I'm making, and I want it to be less about, the final product selling and more about the process as I want to make the process as joyful for me as possible. And one of the ways to do that is to like remove the guesswork, remove all the troubles that come my way. And I just happen to know that one of the troubles is I don't, if you don't know your tools very well, then you're gonna struggle. Yeah, like those color swatches, it's not sexy. I did not like doing that in school, but I like doing it now because it shows me, the way that the colors work together or react, what their different properties are. And I think that when I was younger, I didn't care how long it took to get to an end result. because intuitively I would just find my way through the forest, so to speak, and end up at grandma's house no matter what. But now I want to like chart my path better and be more intentional about the groundwork. So that requires me to know, just to have a deeper understanding of, how to achieve what I want to. Because ultimately, I do want to have a good final piece, but I don't want to meander too much. I want to get there.
Well, that makes sense. And so, oil is your primary medium of choice. And you talked about, you've historically worked out of your apartment or out of your home. How has that been a challenge, just working with oil in a living space when it's, there's toxic fumes and you have to be concerned with airflow, and like, how has that worked for you?
Oh yeah, you just work by some windows. That's how I do it. I try to use materials that won't kill me. I've changed to, odorless, as they call it, solvents. And I try to stick with the stuff that I know how to handle, and I keep ventilation in mind. When it comes time to varnish, I'll do that outside. And I don't really have any like cats or dogs getting into my workspace or anything like that. So it's not really an issue regarding other people or other animals getting sick. I just try to be careful.
Okay. Right on. And it has working out of, your living space forced certain decisions on you, like just due to the logistics of the space that you have, as far as maybe the size or dimensions or the materials that you work with? Have you made certain choices that are more logistical based?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the reasons I don't make sculpture, is I don't really have a space to do it. And that's okay. I also don't feel the pressure yet, but I'm sure sometime I will. And the work that I like to make is about, human size. It's about, if you're standing next to it, it's about the size of your body or less. And so I like that size work, and it just works out well to work out of your living situation if you don't have to make enormous pieces. Right now it feels very satisfying to have the kind of work that I make, and it works out that I have a living space to do it out of. There is something to be said about like separation, psychologically, separation of space for work versus relaxation or entertaining. For example, my living room is not a living room, it's a studio. So there isn't a couch, there aren't chairs or tables for people to sit at. There is a desk, some easels, supplies. So when people do come over, I'm like, you're gonna have something on the floor. I don't have anything for you. You know what I mean? But it's not like I have a lot of people over, especially not during the bad times. But I would say that it pros and cons, right? It does inform the work that gets made, but also it works out for me just fine right now, and that's okay.
Awesome. Very cool. And yeah, I mean, I think another thing about that, just to be, protective of, is work-life balance, and, making sure that you have time to yourself, that, you're not overworking that just because it's right there,
Absolutely. Although that being said, there are many times where I'll be lying in bed and watching a show or reading a book, and I'll look over in the corner of the room and think, yeah, I could put my easel right there. And then all I would have to, I could just roll out of this bed and roll over to that chair. Like, I don't even have to walk all the way to the living room. That would be great. So, I think for me, the life artwork balance doesn't matter so much. I'm very happy if those two blend together. But yeah, I agree with you. It is very important if the day job work stays where it's at.
Very cool. So let's talk about what you have coming up. What is, we talked about the show that you had earlier in the year. What has been your focus since then? And what does the rest of 2022 look like for you?
Yeah, thank you. I've got a couple of group shows lined up here and there, a smattering. I'm working with Utra again with a group show. These are all just group shows. I think that after that big show with them that I had earlier this year, I needed I mean, you need a break. You need to, or at least to slow down. So I only have group shows lined up. It's a few here and there. And there are some things on the horizon, but I don't have confirmation of dates yet. So I'm not going to talk about them. But what I will say is that there are some bigger ideas, or maybe I should say longer narratives that I have interest in bringing to life. And I hope that I get a chance to do that, because I think they're interesting.
Do you think that will, I mean, if you're able, what will that manifest into? Is that a show? Is that some bigger project?
I think if I have it my way, it will be a show plus something else, but I don't know what that something else is just yet. Whether that's like an event or I don't know. It's very much in the early stages, and I'm really glad to be in a position where I can just look ahead at the next couple of years, and you're your own captain. So it's really nice to be in a position to sort of decide where you want to take these ideas to.
That's exciting.
That's kind of where I'm at. Just thinking.
That's awesome. And so I guess anything else that you'd want to put on people's radar that's coming up, events, print releases, stuff that you'd want to have people looking out for?
I do have some prints available on the People's Print Shop right now. I'm not one of those artists who have a lot of prints out and available for purchase. So if you are interested in my work, this is one of the few current ways to get something affordable. I am planning on having some studio sales later this year of more smaller and more affordable pieces, so that if you're not able to get a larger painting through a gallery, and a lot of us aren't, but this is one of the ways you can do that. So so for followers of my Patreon, or people who are subscribed to my newsletter, they'll know about those studio sales when they happen. Otherwise, just group shows here and there.
Awesome. And you mentioned Patreon. How has that been working out for you? Is that...
I just started it.
You just started?
I just started it a couple months ago. And it's something that I've really wanted to do for a long time, but I didn't know how to do it that felt right for me. You've got a lot of really talented artists on there that make it work for them. And, I was looking at all the different ways, the configurations, all the work that gets involved in some cases. And, it just took a long time for me to figure out how to make it feel right. And I think I'm still figuring that out. But yeah, just started. Still early.
Awesome. So where could people follow you along, to keep up with all these cool things you got coming up and the longer term project that you just talked about?
Oh, yeah. Well, primarily I use Instagram, my newsletter, which you can sign up for on my website, sydbee.com. Like I said, my Patreon's brand new. Newsletter is probably the most effective way to stay in touch with me, because Instagram makes it very difficult. You don't see everything all the time. And I only send out my newsletter once every couple months when there's something newsletter worthy to share. But that's probably the most direct way to learn about new things that are going on.
So last question, and this is something that I like to ask everybody. Who is one artist that you'd like to see me have on the show?
I have thought about this because I know you asked that, and I wanted to come prepared. So if you haven't already, there is an artist in town named Mary Iverson, and she does these beautiful paintings. I had the pleasure of doing a mural down here in Seattle. Casey Weldon and I partnered on a mural together, and our mural neighbor was Mary Iverson, and she is wonderful. So her work is are like these really elegant it's like landscape environments meets industrial. It's interesting, and her work seems to speak a lot about the sort of complexity of how those different systems work together. And right now, what I really love is she has been using Instagram to do these very charming PSAs about materials and what do you do with your solvents, set to really, really fun music. Anyway, I think she's great. She's doing really interesting work. She's got a show coming up here, and I think she'd have a lot of really interesting things to say.
Awesome. Well, great suggestion. And Syd, thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me today. I really appreciate this. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a real pleasure.
So that's it for this episode of Art Affairs. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Syd. It was interesting how the topic of burnout and, maintaining a healthy work-life balance came up yet again on the show. It's something that came up in my conversation with Lily a few episodes ago, and again with Tegan last episode. And not only did we talk about that, but we also moved into another topic that's come up quite a lot over the years, which is, an artist using a day job as a means to give themselves the creative freedom to explore and experiment without having to worry about whether or not the work will, be able to support them financially. And this has allowed Syd to, stay more true to her artistic vision. And, it seems like it took a little time to come to that realization or that recognition, but it sounds like things have settled into a more comfortable place for her. This big new project that she's starting on sounds exciting. With this newfound freedom to explore and allow the work to really develop at its own pace, it'll be interesting to see where she takes it. And also how it manifests or how she chooses to present it. It sounds like it might be a combination of a new solo show along with, possibly some other adjacent component. Definitely sign up for Syd's mailing list to stay up to date with this project as well as some of the group shows that she has coming up this year. So thanks again to Syd for joining me today, and thank you for checking out the show. I am truly grateful for your support. And just a reminder, one big way you can help out if you're really enjoying the show would be to check out the show's Patreon. You can find all the details on patreon.com/artaffairs. And as always, you can contact me through my website at artaffairs.podcast.com or on Instagram at artaffairs.podcast. So until next time, be good to yourself and be good to each other.